Barack Obama's 2008 election night speech, his victory speech, as it will, is one of the finest examples I know of a speech that meets the moment. This was a cobbled together version of some somewhat off the cuff remarks with elements of a speech he had given as his stump speech, essentially many times previously. So the elements of it aren't necessarily particularly new, but the way he assembles them to reflect the magnitude of that historic moment, the election of the first black president necessarily, generated a huge surplus value, let's say, to the speech. It's less about the words on the page than the context with which the words interact. He begins it as he began, well, he begins it and continues with a kind of hopefulness throughout that is just striking. If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer. Look at the way that builds. All of these qualifiers. If there's anyone who does this, who thinks this, who thinks that, building, 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 capstone. Tonight is your answer. The sense that the development has a payoff. The work that went into getting to the end of that sentence has a resolution. And this is a mirror of, I would say, rhetorically, a rhetorical mirror of the work that got that particular campaign to victory, but also the work of civil rights movements, of historical progression in general, that are all coming together in that moment. And the rest of the speech all acknowledges this. Obviously, there is a great sense of import around race with this. He is the first African-American president. And that is, he doesn't have to explicitly say that, but that is the critical issue with him. He is also, I would argue, significant because he represents a bit of a generational shift as well. The previous two presidents to him, Presidents Bush and Clinton, were baby boomers. And before them, the previous half a dozen presidents were World War II veterans. So to suddenly go to someone who at this point I think was 48 years old is remarkable. He's one of the youngest presidents in history. He understands that this is about more than him, that this is primarily about the fact that he is a black man, the fact that he is primarily a younger generation, that this has significance beyond him. It's about everybody who can identify with that. Everybody who is post-baby boomer, everybody who is not the white Christian male paradigm that has had a rather lock on the Oval Office up until this point. He then goes about and maintains that sense of it not being about him by rhetorically making it not about him. He goes through a fairly standard litany, I guess you could say, of thank yous, thanking this person, thanking that person. He does a very gracious consideration shout out if you say, to Senator John McCain, who had been his opponent, the Republican nominee. And so he says, I just received a very gracious call from John McCain. He fought long and hard in this campaign, and he's fought even longer and harder for the country he loves. So here Obama is tipping his hat to his rival in this, and doing so in a very gracious way as well. This is fairly standard to acknowledge your opponent. And this is really the purpose of this speech generally, is to try to bring the country together, as is often said. After an election which has been particularly hard fought and particularly intense, as that one was, there is conventionally an effort to unite the country, saying, okay, now we must, as Lincoln says, bind up the nation's wounds. He does that. He tries to, at least rhetorically. Now, this is a fairly standard trope, but still, he's doing it, I would argue, with some great grace. And he goes about from there thanking all the normal people, family, friends, campaign staff. But he leads very quickly out of that into crediting ordinary people. Cliches, perhaps, in a lot of ways. But he's opening up the tent, and he says that it's not just about us, it's not just about our campaign, this has greater import. He says, but above all, I will never forget who this victory truly belongs to. It belongs to you. Yeah, he's pointing out to the entire nation at this point. And then he starts painting these pictures, which can sound a little cliche and hokey, but they have an effect, and it has a very unique effect. Our campaign was not hatched in the halls of Washington. Oh, everybody beats up on Washington. It began in the backyards of Des Moines, in the living rooms of Concord, in the front porches of Charleston. Very, simply hitting Des Moines, Iowa, New Hampshire in Concord, and South Carolina in Charleston. So those are the first three big primaries or primary contests of the primary season. It was built by working men and women who dug into what little savings they had to give $5, $10, and $20 to the cause. It grew for the young people who created the myth of who rejected the myth of their generation's apathy. He starts name checking all of these little types out there. He doesn't have to do individuals at this point. He's thanked some individuals, but now he's trying to cast a wider net. So by doing all of this, people who are standing with him, he needs to say, okay, now we're all coming together. But he also opens that up even more. And he does so by invoking another figure of some inspirational quality, especially to those same groups that he was just talking about, the people who would give in like $5, $10 to his campaign. The road ahead will be long. Our climb will be steep. We may not get there in 1 year or even one term, but America, I have never been more hopeful than I am tonight that we will get there. I promise you, we as a people will get there. And there he's basically just quoting, he's quoting Martin Luther King. That is a Martin Luther King line. So he is invoking that image, that iconic example, to say that, okay, we're making progress together. This is all of us coming together and acknowledging the example from the past. He talks about reaching out to let us remember that it was a man from this state who first carried the banner of the Republican Party to the White House. Here he's talking about Lincoln. Republican Party associating with Lincoln. Republicans love to associate with Lincoln. he is associating them with Lincoln. He is bringing them all together on another image of unity. Again, another shout out, this one to Lincoln. He's taking on that mantle as well, of sorts, rhetorically at least, and a party founded on the values of self-reliance, individual liberty, and national unity. This isn't what the liberals in the audience want to hear necessarily about the Republicans, but he's using it to bring the audience together or bring the country together rhetorically, just saying, no, let's acknowledge Lincoln was a Republican. Lincoln did this, and we can all aspire to that. We all love Lincoln, right? Yes, we all love Lincoln. We can join in that. As Lincoln said to a nation far more divided than ours, we are not enemies but friends. Though passions may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. And to those Americans who support, I have yet to earn. Here's Barack Obama speaking in his own voice, addressing specifically those people who did not vote for him. I may not have won your vote, but I hear your voices. I need your help, and I will be your president too. Reaching out. This is, again, a fairly standard thing, but it's him trying to appeal. And significantly, this is one of the few points where you really hear him use the word I. Most of the time, most of this speech is not about him. Here he is saying, yes, I hear your voices. I will be your president too. You don't get that subject position for the I very often in this speech. But this one, he says, no, take my word for it. I personally vouch for this intention. Our stories are singular, but our destiny is shared, and a new dawn of American leadership is at hand. New dawn of American leadership, new dawn, generational, bringing a sense of possibility. Then he goes into this story of a woman named Ann Nixon Cooper. Says, but what's on my mind tonight is a woman who cast her ballot in Atlanta. She's like a lot of the millions of others who stood in line to make their voice heard in this election, except for one thing: Ann Nixon Cooper is 106 years old. That's interesting. He tells her story through a collective national consciousness. He tells her story as not necessarily, well, she grew up here, she went to elementary school here, she got her first job over here. He doesn't get into all of that stuff. He tells her story as her being witness to the developments in that 106 years. He talks about, she was born into just a generation past slavery, a time when there were no cars on the road or planes in the sky, when someone like her couldn't vote for two reasons: because she was a woman and because of the color of her skin. So that fixes her in a time and place at the very beginning of the 20th century. And then he travels through the 20th century with her, and she sees in that the Dust Bowl, the Depression, the New Deal, Pearl Harbor, World War II, Montgomery buses, Hoses at Birmingham, Bridge in Selma, Preacher from Atlanta, Man touched down on the moon, a wall came down in Berlin. He's giving all of these little images of national history that everybody else knows, everybody else can share, everybody else has perhaps had some experience of that. Maybe not all 160 years of it, but at least they know it from reading or, a history book, or even just watching television, for God's sakes. It is something we can all partake in. The history is something we share. And he knows this, and the speech gathers people around that interpretation of history, so that we're not necessarily learning much more about Ann Nixon Cooper, whatever her name is, Ann Nixon Cooper, but we're learning about ourselves. We're remembering that, well, yeah, we do, yeah, I have that same history. I have that same sense of history, and I have been taught to revere my history. So if you respect the history and I respect the history, we can all gather around that and say, okay, yeah, we've got something in common. But then what really takes my breath away, to be perfectly honest, what really charges me and makes me wonder, okay, I want to know who wrote this line. Maybe it was Jon Favreau, his chief speechwriter, whatever. But when he says that, and this year in the election, she touched a finger to the screen and cast her vote. Wow. After this huge panorama of iconic scenes in American history, the Dust Bowl, thousands and millions of acres, I think, of fields gone to dust. The 100 years of activity, all of these huge, momentous occasions within that. The Man in the Moon, World War II. We Have a Dream. All of this history converges on that one image. Just like in the beginning, it builds, it adds, and then finally, the apotheosis of that finger touching a screen, which is itself an image of a wrinkly, old, probably arthritic and shaky finger reaching towards a digital landscape like none she could have ever imagined. But the meeting of the old and the new, bringing together in this moment what America means, the promise of America, the opportunity of America, the potential of America, the love of America. And throughout all of this, he's tossing out these little lines that, yeah, can be a little hokey, but I think in this case, they add something. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Certainly, this was his call throughout the campaign. This was a well-heeled and well-tested line, but just the way it starts bubbling up almost organically, like it doesn't necessarily make sense within the sentence itself, within the context of grammar. When there was despair in the Dust Bowl and depression across the nation, she saw a nation conquer fear itself and a new deal, new jobs, and a new sense of common purpose. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. There was no question in that. Why are we responding, yes, we can? It's just coming in almost disjunctively, almost, it doesn't fit, but somehow it does. Which is, again, the unity that he's speaking of. Sometimes it doesn't fit. Rhetorically, grammatically, that does not fit. But somehow it makes sense where it is. Maybe you have to hear it, maybe reading it leaves you a little cold, but when it is performed, and he is a oral performer here, it makes sense, it fits, it's appropriate. So he is forcing through this speech, he is forcing people to reimagine what makes sense, reimagine what America is. My favorite part of the speech, I gotta be honest, is not the speech itself. It is just the fact that he uses it and he's so clearly conscious of what it means. It's not about the words. It's about what he represents. He is meeting the moment. And if you watch the video of him delivering the speech, first of all, one of the greatest orators in American political history, we'll stipulate that. But after the speech, the vice president-elect comes out and they do the little pose, and then the families come out and everybody's hugging, and it's a beautiful image of, this beautiful multicolored amalgamation of humanity that is America. And that's a wonderful thing to see. But then after a few minutes of that, everybody's waving. You have the grandparents up there who are very old, and then you have like little Sasha and Malia down there who are adorable and very young, and they're waving, and everybody's going crazy, and the crowd is just ecstatic. Everybody else leaves, and Barack Obama stays. He understands that it's a moment to share and to let everybody else get a look at him in that moment. He knows it's not about him, but that it's about what he represents. And for that moment, he's allowing people to see what he represents and to take it in and share that experience.